Klaus is 23 years old. He's standing at the Bug River on the border between Poland and the Soviet Union, and he's freezing. It's 3:15 in the morning, June 22nd, 1941. Klaus doesn't have a winter coat in his pack. He won't need one. This war, the invasion he's about to be part of, will be over in 6 weeks. Maybe 8, before the snow comes. That's what they told him. 4 years from now, Klaus will be dead. Frozen solid outside a city called Stalingrad, a place he's never heard of, fighting in a war that was supposed to end in autumn 1941. He's not alone. 4 million men are lined up along a front that stretches 3,000 kilometers, from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Black Sea in the south. Behind them, 3,000 aircraft, 6,000 tanks, 600,000 vehicles. The largest invasion force ever assembled in human history. And every single one of them, from the generals in their command posts to the private soldiers shivering in the dark, believes the same thing Klaus believes. This will be quick. This will be easy. The Red Army is a joke, gutted by Stalin's purges, led by incompetents, armed with obsolete weapons. One good kick, Hitler said, and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down. Here's what they don't know. Stalin has been warned 84 times. 84 separate intelligence reports telling him the Germans are coming. From spies, from defectors, from his own military intelligence. He ignored every single one. Last night, just hours ago, Soviet supply trains crossed into Germany, loaded with grain and oil. Resources Stalin is still sending to Hitler. While German artillery is being wheeled into position to fire at dawn. Some of the German soldiers are close enough to the border to hear Russian sentries on the other side, singing, laughing, completely unaware. In 2 hours, the artillery will open fire. In 3 hours, the panzers will surge across the river. In 4 hours, the Luftwaffe will turn the sky black. And for the first few months, it will look like Hitler was right. The Red Army will shatter. Entire Soviet armies will surrender. The panzers will race hundreds of miles into Soviet territory, trapping millions of soldiers in massive encirclements. It will be the most spectacular military victory in modern history. And it will doom the Third Reich. Because here's what nobody understands yet. Not Hitler, not his generals, not Klaus shivering at the Bug River. This war was lost before it began. Not because the Soviet Union was stronger. Not because the winter was colder. Not because Stalin was smarter. But because of 5 weeks. 5 weeks Hitler wasted conquering Yugoslavia and Greece in the spring of 1941. 5 weeks that delayed Operation Barbarossa from May to June. 5 weeks that seemed irrelevant at the time. 4 years from now, German reconnaissance units will get within 19 miles of Moscow, close enough to see the golden domes of the Kremlin through their binoculars. And then winter will hit. The temperature will drop to minus 40 degrees Celsius. And the attack will stop. 19 miles. 5 weeks earlier, and those 19 miles disappear. Moscow falls. The Soviet Union potentially collapses. World War II ends differently. But that's not what happens. What happens is Stalingrad. What happens is Kursk. What happens is 4 years of grinding retreat from the Bug River back to Berlin. What happens is 27 million Soviet dead and 4 million German dead and the complete annihilation of the Third Reich. And it all starts in 2 hours. This is not the story you think it is. You've heard about Stalingrad, the brutal urban warfare, the frozen soldiers, the catastrophic German defeat. You've heard about Kursk, the largest tank battle in history. You've heard about the siege of Leningrad, the desperate Moscow defense, the final Soviet push to Berlin. But those are the consequences. This is the story of how Hitler lost World War II in the summer of 1941. In the first 10 weeks of Operation Barbarossa, when every brilliant tactical victory was actually sealing his strategic doom. This is the story of the decisions that killed the Third Reich. The delays that cost Moscow, the blunders that wasted the panzers, the obsessions that created Stalingrad. This is the story of how the greatest invasion in history became inevitable catastrophe. Because Klaus, standing at the Bug River, waiting for the order to attack, he thinks he's walking into a 6-week campaign. He has no idea he's walking into hell. And hell is about to swallow 4 million men, 3,000 aircraft, 6,000 tanks, and the 1,000-year Reich that was supposed to last forever. June 22nd, 1941, 3:15 a.m. The countdown to doom begins now. Let's go back. Not to June 1941, but to the men who made this catastrophe inevitable. 2 dictators. 2 ideological enemies. 2 men who hated everything the other stood for. And for 2 years, they pretended to be allies. Adolf Hitler never hid what he wanted. 1923. Hitler sits in a cell in Landsberg prison after his failed beer hall putsch in Munich. He's writing a book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. And he's not subtle about it. Page after page, he spells it out. Germany needs Lebensraum, living space. The German people are suffocating in their current borders. They need land. They need resources. They need to expand east. Where? Russia. The vast open spaces of the Soviet Union, the farmland of Ukraine, the oil fields of the Caucasus, the endless forests and steppes stretching to the Urals. That's Germany's future. And the people living there? The Slavic peoples, the Russians, the Ukrainians? Hitler is clear about this too. Untermenschen, subhumans, fit only for slavery or extermination. The communist system governing them, Jewish Bolshevism, as Hitler calls it, must be crushed completely. He publishes this in 1925, 16 years before Operation Barbarossa. Anyone could have read it. Everyone should have read it. Stalin chose not to believe it. Because Stalin had his own problems. 1937. The Great Purge begins. Stalin is paranoid, convinced his own military is plotting against him, convinced enemies surround him, convinced he must strike first before they strike him. So he starts killing his generals. Not a few. Not the suspicious ones. 3/4 of the entire officer corps. Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky, brilliant military theorist, architect of Soviet tank doctrine, arrested in May 1937, tortured, shot in June. Marshal Alexander Yegorov, Civil War hero, arrested in March 1938, shot in February 1939. On and on and on. By 1939, the Red Army has been gutted. The world's largest military force, the most technologically advanced army of the early 30s, reduced to a shell. Officers promoted not because of competence, but because of political loyalty. Generals terrified to make decisions without Stalin's approval. An army that looks powerful on paper, but has suffered a catastrophic collapse in morale and effectiveness. And then comes August 1939. The world watches in shock as Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, sworn enemies, opposite poles of the ideological spectrum, sign a non-aggression pact. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, named after the two foreign ministers who signed it in Moscow. On the surface, we won't attack each other. We'll respect each other's borders. We'll maintain peaceful relations. In reality, they're carving up Eastern Europe between them. Secret protocols divide Poland down the middle. Germany gets the West. Soviet Union gets the East. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, go to Stalin. Hitler gets a free hand to deal with France and Britain without worrying about a two-front war. For Hitler, this is temporary. He tells his generals from day one, this pact is tactical. We need time to deal with the West. Then we turn east and finish what we started. For Stalin, this is survival. The Red Army isn't ready for war, not after the purges, not with officers promoted for loyalty rather than skill, not with training in shambles and morale destroyed. He needs time. Years, if possible. Time to rebuild, to rearm, to train a new generation of officers to replace the ones he murdered. So he convinces himself Hitler means it. That the pact is real. That Germany won't attack. September 1939. Germany invades Poland from the west. 16 days later, the Soviet Union invades from the east. Poland ceases to exist, split between the two powers. For the next 2 years, Stalin bends over backwards to keep Hitler happy. He sends resources to Germany. Grain shipments, oil shipments, raw materials Germany desperately needs for its war machine. Even as his own intelligence services send him report after report after report, warning him that Germany is preparing to invade. 84 warnings. That's not an exaggeration. Historians have counted them. 84 separate intelligence reports between the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and June 1941. From Richard Sorg, Stalin's top spy in Japan, sending detailed information about German invasion plans. From Soviet military intelligence in Berlin tracking German troop movements. From defectors crossing the border to warn that the attack is coming. From British intelligence sharing intercepts of German communications. Stalin ignores them all. He's convinced it's British disinformation. The British want to trick him into a war with Germany. They want the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany to destroy each other while Britain watches safely from across the Channel. He won't fall for it. Spring 1941. German troops flood into Poland. Not the occupied western portion that's been German since 1939, but massing along the Soviet border in eastern Poland. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, thousands of tanks, artillery parks, supply depots, airfields being constructed. Soviet border guards report it. Soviet reconnaissance aircraft photograph it. Soviet intelligence analyzes it and sends urgent reports to Moscow. Stalin's response: do nothing to provoke Hitler. He orders Soviet troops near the border not to respond to German provocations. German aircraft violate Soviet airspace on reconnaissance flights. Stalin forbids his air force from shooting them down. German soldiers cross the border accidentally. Stalin orders them politely escorted back. He increases shipments of grain and oil to Germany. Proof of Soviet good faith. Proof that the alliance is real. June 21st, 1941, the night before the invasion. A Soviet freight train crosses the border into Germany, loaded with grain, heading to German depots. At the same time, literally the same night, German artillery is being moved into firing positions along that same border. At Hitler's Berghof retreat in the Bavarian Alps, the Führer spends the early months of 1941 planning his greatest gamble. His generals gather in the Great Hall. Maps spread across tables. Hitler presents Operation Barbarossa, named after Frederick Barbarossa, the medieval Holy Roman Emperor who led crusades into the East. The plan is ambitious. 3 massive army groups attacking simultaneously across a 3,000-kilometer front. Army Group North, Field Marshal Wilhelm Ritter von Lieb, commanding, will drive through the Baltic states toward Leningrad. Army Group Center, Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, commanding, will thrust straight toward Moscow. Army Group South, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commanding, will sweep through Ukraine toward Kiev and the oil fields of the Caucasus beyond. 4 million men, 3,000 aircraft, 600,000 vehicles, 6,000 tanks. Hitler's generals look at the maps and stay silent. They have doubts. Serious doubts. The front is too wide. The objectives too dispersed. The distances too vast. Russia isn't France. You can't race from border to capital in 6 weeks when the capital is hundreds of miles away and the roads turn to mud in autumn and snow in winter. And the Red Army, for all its weaknesses, is enormous. Nearly 2 million men within striking distance of the western border. Millions more in reserve. Over 20,000 tanks. Yes, mostly obsolete models, but that's still a staggering number. But none of Hitler's generals dare voice their doubts. Not after the victories in Poland, in France, in the Balkans. Not when the Führer seems invincible. Not when questioning him can mean the end of a career, or worse. So, they nod. Greater than, they salute. They prepare for the campaign that will either win the war or doom the Reich. Hitler sets the date. May 15th, 1941. Spring offensive, finished by autumn, Moscow captured before winter. But then something happens. Something unexpected. Something that will change everything. The Balkans explode. March 27th, 1941. Belgrade, Yugoslavia. A coup. The Yugoslav government, which had just signed a pact with Germany, which had just agreed to let German troops transit through Yugoslav territory, which had just bent the knee to Hitler, is overthrown. Pro-British officers seize power. The teenage King Peter II is declared of age and takes the throne. The new government announces it will not honor agreements made by the previous regime. In Belgrade, crowds fill the streets celebrating. In London, Winston Churchill allows himself a rare smile. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler goes into a rage. He takes this personally. Yugoslavia defied him, made him look weak, embarrassed him in front of his allies. Worse, Yugoslavia's neighbour Greece is already at war with Germany's ally Italy, and winning. The Greeks, with British help, have pushed the Italians back into Albania. Mussolini is humiliated. The entire southern flank of Hitler's planned invasion of the Soviet Union is now hostile territory. Hitler makes a decision. Before he can turn east toward Russia, he must secure the south. Yugoslavia and Greece must be crushed. April 6, 1941. The Wehrmacht strikes Yugoslavia and Greece simultaneously. 33 divisions pour into Yugoslavia, from Germany, from Austria, from Hungary, from Romania, from Bulgaria. The Yugoslav army, brave but hopelessly outmatched, tries to resist. They don't stand a chance. The Luftwaffe bombs Belgrade without warning. Operation Punishment, Hitler calls it. Wave after wave of bombers reduce the city centre to rubble. 17,000 civilians die in 3 days. German panzers slice through Yugoslav defences. The terrain is difficult, mountains and narrow valleys, but German combined arms tactics overwhelm resistance. Stuka dive bombers coordinate with advancing tanks. Infantry mop up the scattered defenders. April 12th. 6 days after the invasion began, Belgrade surrenders. April 17th. 11 days. The Yugoslav government signs an unconditional surrender. Hitler is pleased. Yugoslavia crushed in less than 2 weeks. The lesson delivered: this is what happens when you defy the Third Reich. But the campaign isn't finished. Greece still holds out. British forces have landed to help defend it, 2 divisions, not enough to change the outcome, but enough to make the Germans fight for every mile. The Greek army fights hard. At the Metaxas line, along the Bulgarian border, Greek defenders hold fortified positions in the mountains. They bloody the Germans, delay them, make them pay for every kilometre. But they can't stop them. German mountain troops outflank the Greek positions. Panzers push through the Monastir Gap. The Luftwaffe dominates the skies. One by one, Greek defensive lines crumble. April 21st. The Greek army in Epirus surrenders. British forces begin evacuating from southern ports, another Dunkirk, scrambling onto ships under German air attack. April 27th. German troops enter Athens. The swastika is raised over the Acropolis. 3 weeks. From invasion to total victory. Another spectacular German success. Hitler's generals congratulate themselves. Minimal casualties, fewer than 5,000 dead. Complete victory. Southern flank secured. Now they can turn their full attention to the real prize, the Soviet Union. But there's a problem. A problem nobody wants to mention to the Führer. Operation Barbarossa was supposed to launch on May 15th. That date is now impossible. The troops that conquered Yugoslavia and Greece need time to redeploy to Poland. Equipment needs maintenance after the Balkan campaign. Supply dumps need to be repositioned. The entire logistics network needs to shift from south to east. The new launch date, June 22nd. 5 weeks later. 5 weeks of summer weather lost. 5 weeks that seem meaningless in April. The campaign will be over by autumn anyway. What difference does 5 weeks make? At the time, the Balkan campaign looks brilliant. Swift, decisive, minimal cost. Hitler's strategic genius confirmed once again. Only later, much later, when German soldiers freeze 19 miles from Moscow in December, when the winter they weren't prepared for destroys divisions, when the autumn mud they didn't account for drowns the offensive, only then will people calculate backwards. 5 weeks earlier, and they reach Moscow in September. 5 weeks earlier, and the autumn mud doesn't stop them because they're already there. 5 weeks earlier, and the war potentially ends before winter arrives. But in April 1941, nobody knows this yet. The Balkans are conquered. The troops are redeploying. The supplies are moving east. June 22nd approaches. 4 million men gather along the Soviet border. The largest invasion in history prepares to launch. And Stalin, receiving his 84th warning that the Germans are coming, watching his 84th intelligence report get filed away, convinced this is all British disinformation, Stalin issues his final order to Soviet forces on the border. Do nothing to provoke the Germans. Maintain peaceful relations. Trust the non-aggression pact. The trap is set. The stage is prepared. The countdown to catastrophe enters its final hours. 3:15 a.m. June 22nd, 1941. From the Baltic to the Black Sea, 3,000 kilometers of border explode. The artillery barrage sounds like the end of the world. 3,000 guns firing simultaneously. The ground shakes. The sky lights up with muzzle flashes. Shells scream overhead toward Soviet positions. Soviet border guards wake up to their bunkers disintegrating around them. Men stumble out of barracks that are already on fire. Officers grab radios to report they're under attack, and the radios are dead because German commandos cut the communication lines hours ago. At one border post, a Soviet soldier manages to get a message through to headquarters. We are being fired upon. What should we do? The response from Moscow: you must be insane. Why is your signal not in code? They think it's a training exercise. Even as the shells are landing, even as men are dying, Moscow thinks this is some kind of mistake. Dawn breaks. First light creeps across the eastern sky. The Luftwaffe launches. Hundreds of bombers escorted by fighters race towards 66 Soviet airfields. The targets have been scouted for weeks. German reconnaissance aircraft have been flying over Soviet territory with impunity because Stalin forbade anyone from shooting them down. The Soviet planes are parked wingtip to wingtip on open airfields. Perfect targets. Some pilots are sleeping in barracks nearby. Others are performing morning maintenance. None of them are in the air. The first wave of German bombers arrives at dawn. What follows is slaughter. Bombs fall among the parked aircraft. Fighters strafe the runways. Soviet planes explode before their engines even start. Pilots run toward their aircraft and are cut down by machine gun fire. Fuel dumps detonate, sending pillars of black smoke thousands of feet into the air. Some Soviet pilots manage to get airborne, flying obsolete I-16 fighters against German Messerschmitt Bf 109 seconds and Focke-Wulf W 190 seconds. They're brave. They're determined. They don't stand a chance. By noon, 1,200 Soviet aircraft have been destroyed, most of them on the ground. The Soviet Air Force in the Western USSR effectively ceases to exist in a single morning. The Luftwaffe owns the sky. On the ground, the panzers are already moving. The Bug River, the border between German-occupied Poland and Soviet-occupied Poland, is the starting line. German engineers throw pontoon bridges across the river in minutes. The first tanks roll across before the Soviet defenders even understand what's happening. This is blitzkrieg at its finest. Everything the Wehrmacht learned in Poland, in France, in the Balkans, now perfected and applied on the largest scale ever attempted. Panzer spearheads punch through Soviet defensive positions. Fast-moving tank columns bypass strong points, leaving them for infantry following behind. The panzers drive deep, 30, 40, 50 kilometers in the first day, racing to get behind Soviet forces before they can react. Overhead, Stuka dive bombers coordinate with the tank columns, spotting Soviet reinforcements moving toward the front, diving with their signature screaming sirens, bombing the columns before they reach the battle. Behind the panzers, infantry divisions advance on foot. Despite the modern equipment, despite the trucks and half-tracks, most of the German army still walks. Millions of soldiers marching east. Hundreds of thousands of horses pulling supply wagons. The Soviet response is chaos. Communications are down. Officers don't know where their units are. Units don't know where the Germans are. Commanders wait for orders from Moscow, orders that don't come because Stalin still can't believe this is really happening. Some Soviet units fight hard. Fortified positions along the border hold out for hours, even days. Soviet soldiers die at their guns rather than surrender. But bravery isn't enough when you don't know where the enemy is, when you have no air support, when your communications are cut, when orders contradict each other, when ammunition runs out and no resupply comes. Within 48 hours, German panzers have penetrated 50 miles into Soviet territory. Entire Soviet armies are surrounded, cut off, isolated. Tens of thousands of prisoners are already marching west. At the Kremlin, Stalin sits in his office, reviewing the reports. Each one worse than the last. Each one describing catastrophe. He can't process it. This wasn't supposed to happen. Hitler wouldn't dare. The non-aggression pact was real. This must be a provocation by rogue German generals. Hitler doesn't know about it. Stalin's response is to do nothing. He doesn't address the nation. He doesn't mobilize reserves. He doesn't issue coherent orders to the military. For 11 days, while his armies are being destroyed, while his soldiers are dying by the tens of thousands, while German panzers race deeper into Soviet territory, Stalin essentially disappears. He retreats to his dacha outside Moscow. His aides are terrified to disturb him. When they do bring him reports, he flies into rages or sits in stunned silence. The Soviet Union is leaderless at the moment it needs leadership most. And the Germans keep coming. June 29th, 7 days after the invasion began. Army Group Center, commanded by Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, the most powerful of the 3 German army groups, has achieved something extraordinary. 2 panzer groups have been driving east since June 22nd. General Heinz Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group from the south, General Hermann Hoth's 3rd Panzer Group from the north, each moving at speeds that seem impossible, 40, 50, 60 kilometers per day through Soviet territory. Near the city of Minsk, capital of Belarus, the 2 panzer pincers meet. They've surrounded 3 entire Soviet armies. Hundreds of thousands of men trapped in a pocket west of Minsk. Cut off from supply. Cut off from reinforcement. Cut off from escape. The German infantry, marching as fast as they can to catch up with the panzers, arrive and begin tightening the noose. What follows is methodical destruction. Soviet troops try to break out. They attack the German lines in waves. Sometimes they break through temporarily, small groups escaping east. But most are cut down by machine gun fire or driven back by German counterattacks. The Luftwaffe circles overhead like vultures. Any concentration of Soviet troops draws immediate air attack. Supply columns, headquarters units, artillery positions, all bombed repeatedly. By mid-July, the pocket is liquidated. 300,000 Soviet soldiers killed or captured. A number beyond comprehension. That's more than the entire British expeditionary force at Dunkirk. More than the French armies that surrendered in 1940. 300,000 men gone in 3 weeks. German officers are stunned by the scale of their own success. Long columns of Soviet prisoners stretch for miles, trudging west toward captivity. So many prisoners that the Germans can't process them all. Temporary camps are overwhelmed. Men are held in open fields, surrounded by barbed wire, with no shelter, inadequate food, no medical care. Of the 2.5 million Soviet soldiers who will be taken prisoner in 1941, most will never return home. They'll die of starvation, disease, exposure, or execution in German camps. But in late June and early July, that tragedy is still unfolding. What matters to the German commanders is that the encirclement worked. The Blitzkrieg formula, panzer breakthrough, pincer movement, pocket elimination, is functioning perfectly. Guderian wants to keep going. His tanks are at Minsk, but Moscow is only 300 kilometers further east. The roads are dry. The weather is perfect. Soviet resistance is collapsing. Let us race for the capital, he argues. We can be there by August. But the infantry needs time to catch up. The supply lines are stretching dangerously thin. There's a brief pause, 5 days, while the slower-moving infantry divisions arrive to mop up the Minsk pocket. Then the panzers lunge forward again. July 16th. Guderian's panzers reach Smolensk. Deep inside Russia now, 400 kilometers from the border, just 300 kilometers from Moscow. And once again, the pincers close. July 22nd. Another massive encirclement. Another 310,000 Soviet soldiers trapped west of Smolensk. This time, the pocket takes longer to eliminate. The Soviets are learning. They fight harder, counterattack more effectively. Even when surrounded, they don't give up. but the outcome is inevitable. By early August, the Smolensk pocket is crushed. Another 300,000 prisoners. More destroyed equipment. More shattered divisions. The German advance seems unstoppable. In Ukraine to the south, Army Group South is having a harder time. The terrain is more difficult. The Soviet forces more numerous. But even here, the Germans are advancing steadily. And in some places, they're being welcomed. In western Ukraine, in the Baltic states, German troops are greeted as liberators. Villagers line the roads, offering bread and salt, the traditional Slavic welcome. Flowers are thrown at tank columns. People smile and wave. Why? Because they remember the Soviet occupation. Western Ukraine was part of Poland until 1939. The Baltic states were independent until 1940. When the Soviets occupied these territories after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, they brought terror with them. Mass arrests, deportations to Siberia, executions of intellectuals, politicians, military officers. So, when the Germans arrive, many people see them as saviors from Soviet tyranny. They have no idea what the Germans have planned for them. No idea about the racial ideology driving this invasion. No idea that the SS Einsatzgruppen death squads are following behind the Wehrmacht, preparing mass executions. For now, in these early weeks, there's hope that the Germans might be different. That hope won't last long. In London, Winston Churchill receives news of Operation Barbarossa with mixed emotions. On one hand, Britain is no longer alone. The Soviet Union, with its vast resources, its enormous population, its massive military, is now fighting Germany. This changes everything. On the other hand, Churchill despises communism. He spent decades warning about the Bolshevik threat. Stalin murdered millions of his own people. The Soviet system represents everything Churchill opposes. But he doesn't hesitate. The evening of June 22nd, Churchill broadcasts to the British people, "Any man or state who fights against Nazism will have our aid," he says. "Any man or state who marches with Hitler is our foe. It follows, therefore, that we shall give whatever help we can to Russia and the Russian people." He adds, with characteristic dry humour, "If Hitler invaded hell, I would make at least a favourable reference to the devil in the House of Commons." Within days, British Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden signs a mutual assistance agreement with Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov. Britain and the Soviet Union are now allies. But there's little Britain can do immediately to help. They can send supplies by convoy to Murmansk and Arkhangelsk, dangerous Arctic routes threatened by German U-boats and aircraft. They can provide intelligence. They can offer moral support. But they can't stop the German panzers racing across the Russian steppes. That's up to the Red Army. And right now, the Red Army is being destroyed. Early August 1941. The German High Command faces a decision that will determine the outcome of the war. Guderian's panzers are at Smolensk. The road to Moscow lies open. Just 300 kilometers of decent roads through relatively flat terrain. Soviet defenses between Smolensk and Moscow are weak. Most of the Red Army's Western forces have already been destroyed or captured. Summer is at its peak. The weather is perfect for mobile operations. The roads are dry and hard. Guderian calculates that, if he's unleashed now, he can reach Moscow by early September. Moscow isn't just the Soviet capital. It's the hub of the entire Soviet transportation network. All major rail lines radiate from Moscow like spokes on a wheel. Capture Moscow, and you cut the Soviet Union's ability to move troops and supplies across its vast territory. Guderian pleads with his superiors. Let me go now. We can end this war in 6 weeks. But there's a problem to the south. Army Group South is struggling near Kyiv. The Ukrainian capital sits on the west bank of the Dnieper River, and the Soviets are defending it fiercely. German forces have surrounded the city on 3 sides, but can't break through. And east of Kiev, there's a huge concentration of Soviet forces. 4 armies, perhaps 700,000 men, still combat effective, still organized, still dangerous. Hitler looks at his maps. He sees that Soviet concentration at Kyiv and becomes fixated on it. This is the largest remaining Soviet force in the field. Destroy it, and the Red Army's ability to resist will be broken permanently. Leave it intact, and it threatens the southern flank of any advance on Moscow. Hitler makes his decision. Guderian's panzers will turn south. They'll drive down from Smolensk toward Kiev. Army Group South's panzers will drive north. The pincers will meet east of Kiev, trapping those 4 Soviet armies in the greatest encirclement of the war. Moscow can wait. Guderian is furious. He flies to Hitler's headquarters to argue in person. My Führer, he says, Moscow is the prize. It's the political center of the Soviet Union. Capture Stalin's capital and the regime might collapse. At minimum, we cripple their transportation network and their ability to coordinate resistance. Hitler dismisses this. My generals know nothing about the economics of war, he says. Ukraine has the resources we need. Grain for our people, coal and iron for our industry. And beyond Ukraine lie the oil fields of the Caucasus. We must secure these resources. Kiev must fall first. Guderian tries again, but the calendar is a pliant. The Red Army is finished, Hitler interrupts. They can't recover from the losses they've already taken. We have time. We'll destroy the Kiev pocket, then turn north and take Moscow before winter. The meeting ends. Guderian returns to his command in a rage. But orders are orders. August 23rd. Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group wheels south away from Moscow. At the time, this seems like sound military logic. Destroy the enemy's forces before advancing on his capital. Don't leave large enemy formations on your flanks. Secure the resources you need to sustain your war effort. But there are warning signs that Hitler is ignoring. The T-34 tank has appeared. A Soviet design that shocks German tank crews when they first encounter it. Better armor than the Panzer Mark III. Better gun than the Panzer Mark IV. Wider tracks that perform better in mud and snow. Sloped armor that deflects German anti-tank shells. The Germans still have superior tactics and better trained crews. They're still winning every encounter. But the T-34 is a glimpse of the future, when Soviet industry fully mobilizes, when training improves, when these superior tanks come off assembly lines by the thousands. And the Red Army, though battered, is showing resilience. units surrounded fight to the last bullet instead of surrendering. New divisions keep appearing, mobilized from reserves, raised from civilian volunteers, transferred from the Far East. Kill 10 Soviet divisions and 20 more appear. Destroy an army and another is formed to replace it. The Soviet population is enormous, over 190 million people. Germany has 80 million. In a war of attrition, the math doesn't favor the Wehrmacht. But these warnings are easy to dismiss in August 1941. The victories are too spectacular. 600,000 prisoners taken. Thousands of tanks destroyed. The Red Army reeling backward in disarray. Who could doubt that Germany will win? Guderian's panzers drive south. Army Group South's panzers drive north. The greatest encirclement in military history is about to be achieved. And every day spent in Ukraine is a day not spent advancing on Moscow. Every week is a week closer to autumn. Every week closer to the mud. Every week closer to winter. The calendar is running, but Hitler just doesn't realize it yet. September 16th, 1941. East of Kiev, two massive German panzer forces meet. Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group, driving south from Smolensk. General Ewald von Kleist's 1st Panzer Group, driving north from Ukraine. The pincers close. Trapped inside, 4 entire Soviet armies. The 5th Army, the 21st Army, the 26th Army, the 37th Army. 500,000 men, surrounded in a pocket, stretching over 200 kilometers. This is the largest encirclement in military history. Nothing before or since has matched its scale. Soviet commanders had seen it coming. For weeks, they begged Stalin to authorize a retreat from Kiev. General Mikhail Kaponos, commander of the Southwestern Front, sent urgent messages to Moscow. We're being surrounded. We must pull back. We need to save the armies. Stalin's response was always the same. Not one step back from Kiev. The city bore his name in spirit, Kievan Rus, the birthplace of Russian civilization. Abandoning it would be admitting defeat, would damage Soviet morale, would hand Hitler a propaganda victory. So the armies stayed. And now they're trapped. What follows is systematic annihilation. German infantry divisions tighten the noose. The Luftwaffe bombs any concentration of Soviet forces. Artillery pounds the pocket day and night. Soviet soldiers try to break out, desperate charges against German positions, but they're cut down in thousands. Some do escape. Small groups filtering through German lines at night. Officers shedding their uniforms and pretending to be civilians. But most don't make it. General Kaponos tries to lead a breakout. He's killed by German artillery on September 20th. His staff officers die with him. By September 26th, 10 days after the encirclement closed, the battle is over. 500,000 Soviet soldiers killed or captured. Entire divisions cease to exist. Mountains of equipment abandoned or destroyed. Thousands of artillery pieces, hundreds of tanks, all the supplies of 4 armies. For Hitler, this is vindication. His decision to turn south was correct. His generals wanted to rush to Moscow. He knew better. Destroy the enemy's forces first. The capital can wait. German officers celebrate in Kiev's ruins. Champagne flows. Congratulatory messages fly between headquarters. The greatest tactical victory in German military history, perhaps in all military history, but there's a cost nobody's counting yet. The calendar. It's September 26th. Autumn has arrived. The weather is changing. Temperatures dropping at night. Rain becoming more frequent. And Moscow, the prize Guderian wanted to attack in early August, is still 300 kilometers away. Exactly where it was in mid-July when the argument started. 6 weeks spent destroying the Kiev pocket. 6 weeks of perfect summer weather used to win a battle instead of the war. Guderian's prediction haunts the moment. We could have taken Moscow in September. It's late September now. The autumn rains are coming. Winter follows autumn. But in the glow of victory, these concerns seem petty. 500,000 prisoners. The Red Army shattered yet again. Surely the Soviets can't recover from this. Stalin, receiving the news in Moscow, finally takes decisive action. He appoints Marshal Georgy Zhukov, his best remaining general, the man who defeated the Japanese at Khalkhin Gol in 1939, to organize the defense of Moscow. Zhukov arrives in the capital and assesses the situation with brutal honesty. "We're in serious trouble," he tells Stalin, "but we can hold if we act now." He orders the mobilization of Moscow's civilian population. Everyone who can work will dig. Anti-tank ditches. Fortifications. 3 defensive lines around the capital. Women, elderly men, teenagers, hundreds of thousands of Muscovites grab shovels and begin digging. They work through September and into October, through rain and cold, building the defenses that might save their city. And in the east, Stalin has one more card to play. But he doesn't know yet if he can use it. September 8th, 1941. The same week, the Kiev encirclement begins. In the north, Army Group North completes its own encirclement, not of armies, but of a city. Leningrad, named after Lenin, built by Peter the Great as Russia's window to Europe, home to 3 million people, is completely surrounded. German forces hold positions south and west of the city. Finnish forces, Germany's ally, eager to reclaim territory lost in the Winter War of 1939–40, advance from the north. Lake Ladoga lies to the east, and beyond it, more German forces. The city is cut off from the rest of the Soviet Union. Field Marshal Wilhelm Ritter von Lieb, commanding Army Group North, requests permission to storm the city. His troops are ready. The defenses can be breached. Leningrad can be taken. Hitler says no. "We will not storm Leningrad," he orders. "We will surround it, cut off all supply, and starve it into submission. The city will fall on its own. We won't waste German lives in urban combat." The calculation seems sound. 3 million people need food, water, fuel, medicine. Cut off supply, and they'll surrender in weeks. A month at most. Hitler miscalculates. The siege of Leningrad will last 900 days. It will become one of the longest, most destructive sieges in human history. And the people of Leningrad will refuse to surrender. At first, the city has some supplies. warehouses with grain stores, food reserves for the population, fuel for heating. But these are calculated for normal consumption, not for a city under siege, not for 3 million people with no resupply. The only connection to Soviet-held territory is across Lake Ladoga. In summer, small boats can ferry supplies across the lake. But it's not enough, nothing close to enough. German artillery shells the city daily. The Luftwaffe bombs industrial areas and residential neighborhoods. But the real killer isn't explosives. It's hunger. October arrives. The rations are cut. Cut again. Cut again. By November, each person in Leningrad receives 125 grams of bread per day. That's the total food ration. 4 slices of bread. Nothing else. And the bread isn't real bread. It's sawdust mixed with a little flour, cellulose, wallpaper paste, anything that can be formed into something that looks like bread. November 1941. 11,000 people die of starvation in Leningrad in a single month. People collapse in the streets. Bodies lie on sidewalks where they fell. Nobody has the strength to move them. The living step around the dead and keep walking. Families make impossible choices. Parents give their rations to children. Children watch their parents waste away. Everyone is starving. There are reports, quiet, whispered, horrifying, of cannibalism. The NKVD secret police investigate cases of people killing others for meat. Parents protecting children from neighbors who eye them with hunger. December arrives. The cold intensifies. No fuel for heating. People burn furniture, books, anything that can burn. Temperatures inside apartments drop below freezing. Lake Ladoga freezes solid. This creates a lifeline, the road of life, they call it. Trucks can drive across the ice, bringing supplies into the city. But it's dangerous. German artillery targets the ice road. Shells crack the ice. Trucks break through and sink. Drivers freeze to death in their cabs. Still, they keep driving, because without the ice road, everyone in Leningrad dies. The supplies that get through increase the rations slightly, from 125 grams to 200 grams of bread. It's not enough. People keep dying. December's darkest day, December 25th, 1941. 3,700 people die of starvation in Leningrad in 24 hours. The composer, Dmitri Shostakovich, trapped in the city, writes his Symphony No. 7 during the siege. He dedicates it to Leningrad. Parts of it are performed in the city by an orchestra of starving musicians, broadcast on radio to the world. The radio becomes a symbol of resistance. When there's no programming, they broadcast the sound of a metronome. Tick, tick, tick. The message, we are still alive. Hitler expected Leningrad to surrender in weeks. Instead, it becomes a symbol of Soviet defiance. A city that refuses to die even as it starves. The siege will continue until January 1944, 900 days total. Over 1 million civilians will die, most from starvation. But in September and October 1941, that endpoint is unknown. What's clear is that German troops are tied down besieging a city that won't surrender, troops that could have been used elsewhere. And elsewhere, Moscow beckons. September 30th, 1941. Operation Typhoon begins. The assault on Moscow. The objective Hitler has wanted since June. The prize that's been delayed by Kiev, by Leningrad, by Hitler's own strategic choices. Now, finally, Army Group Center turns its full attention to the Soviet capital. The force assembled is overwhelming. Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group has rejoined from the south. Hoth's 3rd Panzer Group and Hübner's 4th Panzer Group are positioned in the north. Between them, over 70 divisions, nearly 2 million men. They have a 2-to-1 advantage in troops, 3-to-1 in aircraft. Better tanks, better training, better commanders. Moscow is 300 kilometers away. The German soldiers believe this is the final push. Take Moscow. The Soviet government collapses. The war ends. They go home for Christmas. The offensive begins with the same tactics that worked at Minsk, at Smolensk, at Kiev. Panzerpincers, breakthrough and encirclement, Luftwaffe support. And it works. October 7th. German panzers meet at Vyazma, west of Moscow. Another massive encirclement. 600,000 more Soviet troops trapped. The Wehrmacht is performing the same blitzkrieg magic that destroyed France, that shattered Yugoslavia, that crushed Poland. Moscow looks doomed. In the capital, panic sets in. Government ministries begin evacuating to Kuibyshev, a city 800 kilometers to the east. Foreign embassies flee. The Kremlin packs up archives and important documents. Stalin considers leaving. His train is prepared, ready to evacuate him to safety. But he doesn't go. On October 19th, Stalin makes a decision that will define the battle. He stays in Moscow. If the capital falls, he'll fall with it. The announcement goes out to the city. Stalin is staying. The effect on morale is electric. If the leader won't abandon Moscow, neither will the people. But morale won't stop panzers. And the panzers are coming. Except something happens on October 8th. Rain. Not a shower. Not a brief storm. The autumn rains, the Rasputitsa, the Russian word for the season of mud. The roads turn to liquid. Not puddles, not soft ground, actual rivers of mud. Trucks sink to their axles. Horses drown trying to pull wagons. Tanks bog down. The German advance slows from 50 kilometers a day to 5. Then to 2. Some days to 0. Soldiers describe it as drowning on dry land. The mud is everywhere. In their boots. In their clothes. In their weapons. Vehicles abandoned in the mud become permanent fixtures. Nobody can pull them out. The Luftwaffe can barely operate. Airfields turn to swamps. Planes can't take off. When they do, they have nowhere to land. Supply convoys that should take hours now take days. Ammunition runs low. Food becomes scarce. The entire German war machine grinds to a crawl. And while the Germans struggle through the mud, Zhukov uses the time. The 3 defensive lines around Moscow are completed. Anti-tank ditches 15 feet deep. Concrete bunkers. Minefields. Artillery positions pre-registered on likely German approach routes. Fresh Soviet divisions arrive from the east. Siberian troops accustomed to harsh conditions. They dig in along the defensive lines and wait. Late October. The rain finally stops. The ground begins to freeze. The mud hardens into ruts and ridges, difficult but passable. The German advance resumes. But now, Soviet resistance is fiercer. They're defending their capital. Every village is contested. Every hill fought over. By early November, Army Group Center is still 50 miles from Moscow. They've gained ground, but slowly, at terrible cost. And then the real winter arrives. Late November 1941. The temperature drops. Not gradually, not gently. The cold descends like a hammer. -10 degrees Celsius. Then -20. Then -30. By early December, temperatures plunge to -40 degrees Celsius. The German army is wearing summer uniforms. This isn't an exaggeration. This isn't poor planning in the normal sense. This is the result of absolute confidence that the war would be over by autumn. Winter clothing exists. Warm coats, felt boots, insulated gloves, they're sitting in warehouses in Germany and Poland. But they were never shipped forward because nobody expected to need them. The troops would be in Moscow by September, home by October. Why waste rail capacity on winter gear? Now, as the cold intensifies, German soldiers suffer. They wrap newspapers under their uniforms for insulation. They stuff straw into their boots. They cut up blankets to make crude scarves. It's not enough. Frostbite becomes epidemic. Soldiers wake up, unable to feel their feet. Their fingers turn black. Ears and noses freeze solid and snap off. Field hospitals fill with frostbite casualties. Doctors amputate toes, fingers, entire feet. Some men lose both legs below the knee. By December, there are more frostbite casualties than combat casualties in some divisions. The cold destroys equipment. Tank engines won't start. The oil freezes solid overnight. German crews try building fires under their tanks to warm the engines. Sometimes it works, sometimes the tank catches fire. Vehicle batteries die. Rubber seals crack. Weapons freeze. The bolt on a rifle jams. The machine gun stops firing mid-burst. Artillery recoil mechanisms seize up. Horses, hundreds of thousands of horses still pulling German supply wagons, start dying. They freeze, standing up. Soldiers wake to find their horses dead in harness, frozen solid during the night. But despite all this, the German army keeps pushing forward. Because Moscow is so close. Late November. German reconnaissance units of the 258th Infantry Division reach the town of Khimki on Moscow's northern outskirts. They can see the city. They can see buildings. Some soldiers claim they can see the golden domes of the Kremlin glinting in the distance. Officers take photographs of road signs. Moscow, 30 kilometers. 19 miles. This is the closest German forces will ever get to the Soviet capital. They want to push on. Just 19 miles. One more push, and they're in Red Square. But they're exhausted, frozen, running on fumes. Ammunition is critically low. The supply lines, stretching hundreds of kilometers back through mud and snow, can barely deliver enough food to keep the men alive, let alone enough shells to sustain an offensive. Soviet resistance has turned fanatical. They're defending their capital now. Every street, every building, every meter of ground. Russian workers' battalions, civilians given rifles and sent to the front, die in waves but slow the German advance. Red Army regulars fight with suicidal determination. Every counterattack is pressed home, regardless of casualties. December 4th, 1941. The German High Command orders one final push. Everything they have left. Take Moscow or die trying. The attack goes nowhere. Soviet defenses are too strong. German troops too weak. The temperature too cold. By evening, the assault has failed. That night, December 4th into December 5th, the temperature plunges to -40 degrees Celsius. German soldiers in forward positions freeze to death in their foxholes. Tank crews huddle inside their vehicles trying to stay alive. Some don't make it to morning. Sentries collapse at their posts and are found frozen solid hours later. Medical officers report that men's uniforms are freezing to their skin. When wounded soldiers are brought to aid stations, medics have to cut the uniforms off carefully because pulling them removes frozen flesh. December 5th. Dawn breaks over frozen German positions. Field commanders report to headquarters, "We cannot continue. The men are freezing. The vehicles won't start. We have no ammunition for an assault. Further offensive operations are impossible." General Fedor von Bock, commanding Army Group Center, reluctantly agrees. He sends the order, "Halt the attack on Moscow. Consolidate positions. Dig in and wait for spring." The dream of capturing Moscow in 1941 dies in the snow 19 miles from the Kremlin. But the German generals still believe they'll finish this next year. "We came so close. We nearly had it. Come spring, when we're resupplied and rested, we'll take the city and end this war." They have no idea what's about to hit them. Because while they've been freezing outside Moscow, Stalin has been preparing a surprise. Richard Sorge, Soviet master spy in Tokyo. The man who will save Moscow. All through summer and autumn 1941, Stalin has been terrified of a two-front war. Germany attacking from the west, that's already happening. But what if Japan attacks from the east? The Soviet Union and Japan share a border in Manchuria. They fought a brief border war there in 1939, the Battle of Khalkhin Gol, where Zhukov defeated the Japanese. But relations remained tense. Japan could invade Soviet Siberia at any moment. So Stalin keeps massive forces in the east, 30 divisions, over 500,000 men, tanks, artillery, aircraft. An entire army group sitting in Siberia, unable to help defend Moscow, because Stalin can't risk leaving the eastern border undefended. October 1941. Richard Sorge sends a message from Tokyo. Japan will not attack the Soviet Union. Their focus is south, toward the resource-rich Dutch East Indies, toward British Malaya toward confrontation with the United States. The Japanese military has decided, move south, not north. Sorge's intelligence is rock solid. He has sources at the highest levels of the Japanese government. Stalin trusts him, one of the few intelligence sources Stalin actually believes. The decision is immediate. Strip the Far Eastern defenses. Send everything west. 30 divisions begin moving along the Trans-Siberian Railway. Over 500,000 men traveling 6,000 kilometers from the Pacific to Moscow. These aren't raw recruits. They're experienced troops, battle-hardened from the Japanese border war. Equipped with winter clothing, they're from Siberia, they know cold. Trained in winter warfare tactics. By early December, they're arriving at Moscow. Fresh divisions taking positions behind the defensive lines. Rested. Supplied. Ready. Marshal Zhukov has been planning. While the Germans exhaust themselves attacking, while they freeze and starve and bleed, he's been assembling a counter-offensive force. 1 million men. 7,000 artillery pieces. 1,000 tanks. Over 1,000 aircraft. The Germans have no idea these forces exist. Their intelligence has completely failed to detect the buildup. They think the Red Army is finished. They think Soviet reserves are exhausted. They're wrong. December 5th, 1941. Pre-dawn. The same morning, the Germans halt their attack on Moscow. Soviet artillery opens fire along a 200-mile front. Katyusha rocket launchers, Stalin's organs. The Germans call them because of the screaming sound the rockets make, unleash salvo after salvo. The multiple rocket system is terrifying. 32 rockets launched in 10 seconds. The explosions arrive almost simultaneously across an entire area. German positions dissolve under the bombardment. Men in summer uniforms huddled in shallow frozen foxholes have nowhere to hide. Shells land among them with devastating effect. Then the tanks come. T-34 seconds, by the hundreds. Wide tracks designed for snow and mud. Diesel engines that start in the cold. They surge forward through the winter landscape while German panzers sit frozen and useless. Behind the tanks, Soviet infantry in white winter camouflage. Some on skis, moving fast through the snow. Others on foot, but equipped for winter warfare, quilted jackets, felt boots, fur hats. The contrast is stark. Soviet soldiers prepared for winter. German soldiers freezing in summer uniforms. The German line breaks. Not everywhere. Not immediately. German troops are still professional soldiers, still well trained. But they're shocked by the ferocity of the Soviet attack. Where did all these Russians come from? We destroyed their armies. We captured millions of prisoners. How can they still be attacking? Panic spreads through German units. Some hold their ground and fight. Others retreat without orders. A few surrender, unthinkable for Wehrmacht troops just months earlier, but the cold has broken their will. Soviet ski troops infiltrate behind German lines. They attack headquarters units, supply depots, artillery positions. Suddenly, the Germans are fighting in all directions. The counter-offensive continues for 7 days straight. December 5th through December 12th. Relentless Soviet attacks all along Army Group Center's front. German forces are pushed back 50 to 150 miles in different sectors. Towns that fell to Germany in October are recaptured. Kalinin, Klin, Solnitnogorsk. The Wehrmacht is retreating. For the first time since the start of Barbarossa, German forces are going backward instead of forward. Casualties mount catastrophically. Over 100,000 German soldiers killed, wounded, or missing in the first week. And the frostbite cases keep coming. Thousands more men rendered combat ineffective by the cold. The myth of German invincibility shatters in the snow outside Moscow. December 16th, 1941. Field Marshal Walther von Brauchitsch, Commander-in-Chief of the German Army, the man theoretically in charge of all ground forces on the Eastern Front, suffers a heart attack. It's stress-induced. The catastrophe unfolding outside Moscow, the impossible situation, the mounting losses, his heart gives out. Hitler visits him in the hospital, not out of concern, out of opportunity. December 19th. Hitler announces he's dismissing Brauchitsch. And he's not appointing a replacement. Instead, Hitler declares himself Supreme Commander of the German Army. He will personally direct operations on the Eastern Front. A World War I corporal, a man whose military experience consists of 4 years in the trenches as an enlisted soldier, now commands millions of troops across multiple theatres of war. His generals are horrified but silent. Nobody dares object. And Hitler immediately begins purging the officer corps. General Heinz Guderian, the Panzer genius who led the drive to Smolensk, who begged to race for Moscow back in August, is sacked. His crime, requesting permission to withdraw his forces to defensible positions. Hitler calls this defeatism. General Erich Hoepner, commanding 4th Panzer Group, dismissed and stripped of rank for ordering a tactical retreat without permission. Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, commanding Army Group Center, allowed to resign due to health reasons. Everyone knows he was fired. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commanding Army Group South, dismissed for requesting to withdraw from an exposed position. In 2 weeks, 35 senior officers are fired, reassigned, or forced into retirement. The message is clear: obey Hitler absolutely or be destroyed. But Hitler doesn't just purge. He issues an order that may have saved the German army, at least temporarily. December 20th. The Stand Fast Order. No retreat. No withdrawal. German forces will hold their positions no matter the cost. Officers who order retreats without Hitler's personal permission will be court-martialed and shot. Form hedgehog defensive positions. Villages become fortresses. Every town held to the last man. No step backward. The order seems insane. Hold positions in -40-degree weather with no winter clothing? Stand and fight when the enemy has overwhelming superiority. Die where you stand rather than retreat to defensible lines. But it works. The panic stops. German units that were beginning to disintegrate, that were retreating in disorder, suddenly find discipline again. Small villages become strongpoints. A company of German infantry holes up in a cluster of wooden houses and refuses to surrender. Soviet attacks batter against these positions but can't break them all. The hedgehog defense creates a network of resistance. Soviet forces push past some strong points but then find themselves taking fire from behind. Their supply lines get cut. Their advances stall. By late December, the German line has stabilized. They've been pushed back significantly. They're no longer 19 miles from Moscow. They're 60 or 70 miles away in some sectors. But they've stopped retreating. The cost is horrific. Entire divisions destroyed holding impossible positions. Casualties in the hundreds of thousands. But the line holds. Hitler learns the wrong lesson from this. He believes his iron will saved the army. That his refusal to allow retreat prevented total collapse. That his strategic genius overcame his general's defeatism. From this moment forward, Hitler will apply the same doctrine in every crisis. No retreat ever. Stand and die. This inflexibility will doom German forces at Stalingrad, at Kursk, in countless battles to come. But he doesn't know that yet. Right now, in December 1941, the Standfast Order seems vindicated. The retreat has stopped. The front has stabilized. Moscow is saved, but still unconquered. The war will continue. And Stalin, emboldened by success, is about to overreach. January 1942. Stalin sits in the Kremlin, reviewing the results of the December counteroffensive. The Germans have been pushed back from Moscow. Entire sectors of the front have moved 50, 70, 100 miles west. Soviet forces recaptured dozens of towns and cities. The myth of German invincibility is shattered. Stalin is elated. For the first time since June, the Red Army is winning. And he wants more. He calls a meeting of the Stavka, the Soviet High Command. Marshal Zhukov attends, along with other senior generals. Stalin announces his plan. We will launch a general offensive across the entire front. From Leningrad in the north to the Caucasus in the south. Every Soviet army will attack simultaneously. We will drive the fascists back to Poland. We will liberate our territory by spring. Zhukov objects. Comrade Stalin, he says carefully, you don't contradict Stalin without risking your life. We don't have the resources for an offensive across the entire front. Our success at Moscow was achieved through concentration of force. We massed troops in one sector and overwhelmed the enemy there. He pulls out maps. If we spread our forces thin across 3,000 kilometers, we won't have decisive superiority anywhere. The Germans will hold their hedgehog positions. We'll take heavy casualties for minimal gains. Stalin dismisses this. The Germans are beaten. They're freezing, demoralized, retreating. Now is the time to destroy them completely. Other generals stay silent. They know better than to argue once Stalin has made up his mind. The order goes out. General offensive across the entire Eastern Front. January through April 1942. 4 months of grinding, bloody, largely futile combat. Soviet forces attack everywhere. In the north, trying to break the Leningrad siege. Around Moscow, pushing the Germans further back. In Ukraine, attempting to recapture Kharkov. In the south, trying to retake the Crimea. Some attacks succeed locally. Soviet forces recapture territory, push the Germans back another 20-30 miles in some sectors. But nowhere do they achieve a decisive breakthrough. The German hedgehog defences prove remarkably resilient. Small garrisons in fortified villages hold out for weeks against overwhelming Soviet numbers. German artillery, when they have ammunition, devastates Soviet infantry attacks. The Luftwaffe, operating from improved winter airfields, provides close air support. Soviet casualties are appalling. Attacking across frozen ground against entrenched positions. Inadequate artillery preparation because shells are in short supply. Infantry assaults pressed home regardless of losses. Entire divisions ground down to nothing. The Red Army is learning combined arms tactics, slowly, painfully. But they're learning by dying. Officers who survive battles take lessons forward. Those lessons are written in the blood of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The Germans counterattack when they can. Local operations to recapture strong points. Tactical withdrawals to better positions. But they're too weak for major offensives. They barely have enough strength to hold the line. By April, both sides are exhausted. The Rasputitsa returns, spring mud season. The ground turns to liquid again. Operations become impossible. Tanks bog down. Supply trucks can't move. Even infantry struggle through knee-deep mud. The fighting gradually peters out. Both armies settle into their positions and wait for the ground to dry. Stalin's winter offensive has failed to achieve decisive results. The Germans have been pushed back from Moscow. That's significant. But they haven't been driven out of the Soviet Union. They haven't been destroyed. The front has stabilized roughly 200 kilometers west of where it was in December. The cost for this limited success, hundreds of thousands more Soviet casualties. Zhukov's prediction was correct. Spreading forces across the entire front diluted Soviet strength. Concentration of force would have achieved better results with fewer losses. But Stalin doesn't admit mistakes. For the Wehrmacht, the 4-month defensive battle is also costly. They've lost more men, more equipment they can't replace, more combat effectiveness eroded. But they survived. The line held. Moscow remains unconquered. And now, as spring arrives, Hitler begins planning his next move. He's learned one lesson: can't attack across the whole front like 1941. Germany doesn't have enough strength for that anymore. He needs to choose objectives carefully. Concentrate his forces. Strike where it matters most. And Hitler knows what matters most. Oil. Germany's oil supplies are running critically low. Romanian production can't meet demand. Synthetic fuel production is insufficient. Without oil, the panzers are useless. The Luftwaffe, grounded. The Navy immobilized. The Soviet Union has oil. The Caucasus oil fields, Maikop, Grozny, Baku, produce 80% of Soviet petroleum. Capture those fields, and Germany fuels its war machine while crippling the Soviet Union. Hitler's mind turns south, toward Ukraine, toward the Caucasus, toward the oil that will win or lose the war. Operation Blue begins taking shape. the summer offensive of 1942, the campaign that will lead to a city on the Volga River, a city that bears Stalin's name, a city called Stalingrad. December 7th, 1941. While German soldiers freeze outside Moscow, halfway across the world, something happens that will change everything. Japanese carrier aircraft attack the United States Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. In 2 hours, they sink or damage 18 warships. Over 2,000 Americans die. The United States, the world's greatest industrial power, a nation of 130 million people, enters the war. December 8th. America declares war on Japan. Hitler could have stayed out of it. Germany has no treaty obligation to join Japan's war against America. The tripartite pact with Japan and Italy only requires mutual defense if a member is attacked, not if a member attacks someone else. But on December 11th, 4 days after Pearl Harbor, Hitler declares war on the United States. Why? His generals are baffled. America is 3,000 miles away across the Atlantic. Its military is small, but its industrial capacity is enormous. Germany gains nothing from this declaration and potentially creates a massive new enemy. Hitler doesn't care. He's contemptuous of America. A mongrel nation, he calls it, incapable of fighting. He believes American democracy is weak, that the United States won't have the will to sustain a long war. He's catastrophically wrong. But the immediate crisis isn't America. American troops won't reach Europe in significant numbers for over a year. The immediate crisis is oil. Winter 1941-42. German economic planners deliver sobering news to Hitler. Germany consumes 250,000 barrels of oil per day. Domestic production, 75,000 barrels per day. Romanian oil fields provide another 100,000 barrels per day. Synthetic fuel production adds 50,000 barrels per day. The math doesn't work. Germany is using more oil than it produces. Reserves are being depleted. At current rates, the Wehrmacht will run out of fuel by the end of 1942. Without oil, the panzers are steel boxes. The Luftwaffe is grounded. The Navy is harbour decoration. Germany loses the war. Hitler's advisors present the solution. The Caucasus oil fields in southern Russia. Maikop produces 25,000 barrels per day. Grozny produces 40,000 barrels per day. Baku, the largest oil center in the Soviet Union, produces 200,000 barrels per day. Together, these fields produce 80% of Soviet oil. Capture them, and Germany solves its fuel crisis while crippling the Soviet war machine. It's the strategic key to winning the war. Spring 1942. Hitler announces Operation Blue, Fall Blau in German. The plan is focused. No more broad front offensives like 1941. Germany doesn't have the strength for that anymore. Instead, concentrate everything in the south. 2 army groups will advance. Army Group A, commanded by Field Marshal Wilhelm List, will drive into the Caucasus Mountains toward the oil fields. Army Group B, commanded by General Maximilian von Weichs, will advance along the Don River to protect Army Group A's northern flank. The objective is economic, not political. Moscow can wait. Leningrad can wait. Germany needs oil or the war is lost. To mass forces for Operation Blue, Hitler strips other sectors of the front. Army Group North besieging Leningrad gives up divisions. Army Group Center, defending the Moscow, approaches transfers units south. Every available panzer, every experienced division, flows toward Ukraine. Germany's allies are called upon to fill the gaps. Romanian divisions, Italian divisions, Hungarian divisions. These Allied troops are poorly equipped compared to German forces, inadequately trained for modern warfare, and their morale is questionable. But Germany has no choice. Manpower is running short. Use allies or don't have enough troops to execute the offensive. By late spring, over 1 million German and Allied soldiers are assembled in southern Russia. 3,000 tanks, thousands of artillery pieces. The Luftwaffe concentrates its remaining strength in the south. Operation Blue is scheduled for late June. Summer offensive. Finish before winter. Capture the oil fields and win the war. But first, there's unfinished business. The city of Kharkov in eastern Ukraine. And Stalin is about to hand Hitler an unexpected gift. May 1942. Stalin decides to strike first. Soviet intelligence reports German forces massing in the south. Stalin believes he knows what Hitler is planning, an offensive toward Moscow from the south. He's wrong. Hitler is planning Operation Blue toward the Caucasus. But Stalin doesn't know that. So Stalin orders a preemptive offensive. Attack the Germans before they attack you. Recapture Kharkov, Ukraine's second largest city, an industrial center. Destroy German forces in the region. Disrupt their offensive before it begins. Marshal Semyon Timoshenko commands the operation. He has 6 armies, over 600,000 men. The offensive launches on May 12th. Initial success. Soviet forces break through German defensive positions. They push 20, 30, 40 miles in the first few days. Kharkov seems within reach. Stalin is jubilant. "We're liberating Ukraine," he announces. He orders Timoshenko to accelerate the advance. Take Kharkov. Don't stop. But the Germans are preparing a trap. Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, recalled from dismissal after the Moscow retreat, now commanding Army Group South, sees the Soviet offensive as an opportunity. The Soviets are pushing deep into a salient. They're overextended. Their flanks are exposed. May 17th. German panzers strike from the north and south simultaneously. The classic pincer movement. Soviet forces racing toward Kharkov suddenly find themselves being surrounded. Timoshenko realizes the danger. He radios Moscow, requesting permission to withdraw. Pull back before the pincers close. Save the armies. Stalin refuses. Continue the offensive. Take Kharkov. May 23rd. The German pincers meet. The trap closes. What follows is catastrophic. Soviet forces trapped in the Kharkov pocket fight desperately to break out. Some units succeed, small groups filtering through German lines. But most are caught. By May 28th, 16 days after the offensive began, it's over. 200,000 Soviet soldiers killed or captured. 70,000 dead on the battlefield. Over 1,200 tanks destroyed. Hundreds of artillery pieces lost. The southern front is gutted. The armies that were supposed to defend against Operation Blue have been annihilated in a failed offensive. Hitler is delighted. The road to the Caucasus is now wide open. Soviet resistance in the south is shattered. Operation Blue can proceed even better than planned. But there's still one obstacle: the fortress city of Sevastopol in the Crimea. Sevastopol sits on the Black Sea, home to the Soviet Black Sea Fleet. It's been under siege since October 1941, 8 months of encirclement. The defenders are Soviet Marines, sailors who lost their ships, NKVD troops, and civilian volunteers. They've turned the city into a fortress. Underground bunkers carved into rock. Coastal artillery batteries in concrete emplacements. Every building fortified. German forces surround the city but can't take it. Army Group South can't advance into the Caucasus while Soviet forces hold Sevastopol behind their lines. The fortress must fall. May through June 1942. The Germans bring up their heaviest weapons. The siege gun Dora, the largest artillery piece ever built. It weighs 1,400 tons. Requires a crew of 4,000 men to operate. Fires shells weighing 7 tons. Each shell creates a crater 30 feet deep. Dora fires 48 shells during the siege. Each impact is like an earthquake. Entire buildings disintegrate. Underground bunkers collapse. But Sevastopol doesn't surrender. The defenders fight from the rubble. When Germans capture one position, Soviet troops counterattack at night to retake it. Individual buildings change hands 5, 10, 15 times. June 2nd. The final German assault begins. Infantry supported by Stuka dive bombers and heavy artillery storm the remaining Soviet positions. The fighting is savage. Hand-to-hand combat in bunkers. Flamethrowers clearing fortifications. Soviet Marines fighting to the last bullet. July 4th, 1942. After 8 months of siege, Sevastopol falls. Over 100,000 Soviet casualties, dead, wounded, captured. German losses, 25,000. But now, Hitler's southern flank is secure. The Crimea is conquered. Kharkov is held. Soviet forces in the south are shattered. The road to the Caucasus is open. Operation Blue can begin. June 28, 1942. Exactly 1 year and 6 days after Operation Barbarossa began. Operation Blue launches. Army Group B strikes east toward the Don River. Army Group A drives southeast toward Rostov and the gateway to the Caucasus. Initial success is spectacular. Soviet defences, weakened by the Kharkov disaster, collapse in multiple sectors. German panzers race across the Ukrainian steppes. Entire Soviet units retreat without fighting. By July 9th, Army Group A is approaching Rostov. The city sits at the mouth of the Don River, where it flows into the Sea of Azov. Capture Rostov, and the door to the Caucasus swings open. Everything is going according to plan. German officers compare it to the summer of 1941. The same rapid advances. The same Soviet collapse. We'll have the oil fields by September, they tell each other. Then Hitler starts changing the plan. July 13th. Hitler issues Directive 41. Army Group B is ordered to capture the city of Stalingrad on the Volga River. This wasn't part of the original Operation Blue plan. Stalingrad is an industrial city. It produces tanks and tractors, controls river traffic on the Volga. But strategically, it's not critical to the oil offensive. Why does Hitler want it? The city bears Stalin's name. Volgograd, city on the Volga, was renamed Stalingrad in 1925 to honor Stalin's defense of it during the Russian Civil War. For Hitler, the symbolism is irresistible. Capture the city, bearing his enemy's name. The propaganda value seems enormous. So, Army Group B suddenly has two objectives. Protect Army Group A's flank along the Don River, the original mission, and capture Stalingrad, a massive new task requiring significant forces. July 17th. Hitler makes his second blunder. He's frustrated by Army Group A's progress in the Caucasus. The mountains are difficult terrain. Soviet resistance is stiffening. The advance is slower than Hitler expected. So he orders most of Army Group B's panzers transferred south to reinforce Army Group A. Help them break through the Caucasus faster. This leaves Army Group B, now ordered to capture Stalingrad without most of its armour. The advance on Stalingrad slows to a crawl. Meanwhile, the panzers reinforce Army Group A and accelerate its advance. Late July, early August, spectacular progress. Army Group A races across the Caucasus steppes. They reach within 70 miles of the Caspian Sea, threatening to cut off all Soviet forces in the region. August 9th. German forces capture Maikop, the first of the Caucasus oil fields. But when they arrive, they find the oil field completely destroyed. Soviets demolished every well, every refinery, every pipeline. Sabotage so thorough it would take years to repair. Germany won't get a single barrel of oil from Maikop. And now Hitler makes his third blunder. Mid-August. Enraged by Army Group B's slow progress towards Stalingrad, Hitler orders the panzers back north. Take them away from Army Group A and send them to capture Stalingrad faster. So the panzers that were just sent south to help in the Caucasus are now sent north to help at Stalingrad. They've spent 2 weeks shuttling back and forth instead of fighting. Army Group A, suddenly stripped of its mobile strike force, stalls in the Caucasus foothills. They're within 50 miles of Grozny and its oil fields, within striking distance of Baku and the greatest oil reserves in the region. But without panzers, they can't break through Soviet defenses. The strategic objective of Operation Blue, capture the Caucasus oil fields, fails. Maikop is destroyed. Grozny and Baku remain in Soviet hands. Germany gets no oil. Instead, Hitler's attention has fixated on Stalingrad, a city that wasn't part of the original plan, a city that matters more for symbolism than strategy. Late August 1942. General Friedrich Paulus's Sixth Army, reinforced with the panzers Hitler keeps shuffling around, approaches Stalingrad from the west. The city stretches 12 miles along the western bank of the Volga River. Factories, residential neighborhoods, industrial districts, population 400,000 civilians, plus Soviet garrison troops. Stalin issues his order. Not a step back. The city that bears my name will not fall. Two dictators' egos are about to converge on one city. The obsession with capturing Stalingrad. The obsession with defending Stalingrad. Neither will let go. And what was supposed to be a strategic offensive to capture oil has become a death match for a city. The meat grinder is about to begin. August 23rd, 1942. General Friedrich Paulus's Sixth Army reaches the Volga River. Not at Stalingrad itself, 8 kilometers north of the city. The 14th Panzer Corps punches through Soviet defenses and creates a corridor to the river. A narrow salient, just 8 kilometers wide, but it cuts Stalingrad off from the north. That evening, the Luftwaffe launches the largest air raid on a Soviet city since the start of the war. 600 aircraft. Wave after wave of bombers. Their target isn't military installations or industrial facilities, it's the city centre, the residential neighbourhoods, the wooden houses where civilians live. The bombs are incendiary, designed to start fires. Stalingrad burns. Entire neighbourhoods ignite simultaneously. Wooden structures become infernos in minutes. The fires merge into a firestorm, temperatures so intense they create their own wind, sucking oxygen toward the flames. 40,000 civilians die in a single night. Burned alive in their homes, suffocated in cellars where they sought shelter, crushed under collapsing buildings. Survivors stumble through smoke-filled streets trying to reach the Volga River. Some make it across on boats and barges. Many don't. Bodies float in the river for days. By morning, Stalingrad is a wasteland of rubble and smoke. Entire districts reduced to ash. The city, Stalin, built as a showcase of Soviet industrial power, devastated in one night. But the destruction creates an unexpected problem for the Germans. Ruins are easier to defend than intact buildings. Rubble creates cover. Collapsed structures become fortified positions. The Germans have just transformed Stalingrad into a defender's paradise. Early September. Paulus's Sixth Army begins the assault on the city itself. The plan is straightforward. Drive straight through from west to east. Reach the Volga. Split the city into sections. Then systematically clear each section. 2 weeks, maybe 3. What actually happens is hell. German infantry advances into the ruins and discovers that nothing works the way it should. Artillery can't hit targets it can't see. Tanks can't maneuver through rubble-choked streets. The Luftwaffe can't provide close air support without hitting German troops mixed among Soviet defenders. The Red Army defends Stalingrad with tactics born of desperation. General Vasily Chuikov commands the 62nd Army inside the city. His headquarters is in a bunker on the Volga riverbank, close enough that German artillery regularly shells it. Chuikov's order to his men: hug the Germans so close they can't use their advantages. What does this mean in practice? Get within grenade-throwing distance of German troops, so close that the Luftwaffe can't bomb without killing Germans. So close that German artillery can't fire without hitting their own men. The result is combat at point-blank range. Battles for individual buildings last for days. Germans take the ground floor, Soviets hold the second floor. They fight room to room, throwing grenades through walls, firing through ceilings. A German officer writes, "We have fought for 15 days for a single house." The front is a corridor between burned-out rooms. It is the length of a human body from the enemy. The distance between our posts and the Russians is the throw of a grenade. We have fought longer for this one house than we fought for France. The Germans call it Rattenkrieg, the War of the Rats, because the fighting happens everywhere. In cellars and sewers, on staircases and rooftops, through holes blown in walls. Soldiers move through rubble like rats through warrens, emerging to kill and disappearing again. Soviet defenders use the sewers to move unseen. They travel underground, emerge behind German lines, attack, then vanish back into the sewers. The Germans never know where the next attack will come from. Snipers become terror weapons. Soviet marksmen hide in ruins for hours, waiting for a target. A German officer exposes himself for 3 seconds, dead. A soldier lights a cigarette at night, dead. The most famous Soviet sniper, Vasily Zaitsev, reportedly kills 225 Germans during the battle. The Soviets turn him into a propaganda hero. Newspapers print stories about his duels with German snipers. Whether all the stories are true doesn't matter. What matters is the psychological effect on German troops who know a world-class killer is hunting them. The industrial complexes become fortresses. The tractor factory. Before the war, it produced tractors and T-34 tanks. Now, it's a battleground. German and Soviet troops fight among the machinery. Tanks roll off the assembly line and drive straight into combat 50 meters away. Workers and soldiers fight side by side. The Red October steel plant. The Barricadi gun factory. Every workshop contested. Every building a strong point. Battles measured in meters, not kilometers. One German soldier describes the fighting, "We advance through Stalingrad at the speed of corpses piling up. We take 20 meters in the morning and lose 15 at night. Every step forward costs a life. Every building costs a platoon." Soviet reinforcements arrive every night across the Volga. The river is under German artillery fire, under Luftwaffe attack. Boats and barges cross in darkness, engines silent, trying not to be spotted. Many are hit, torn apart by shells, sunk by bombs. Hundreds of soldiers drown. But thousands get through. Fresh divisions ferried from the east bank to the west. They cross the river, knowing they might not survive the night. Many don't. Average life expectancy for a Soviet soldier in Stalingrad, 24 hours. September gives way to October. The Germans control most of the city. Soviet-held territory is compressed to narrow strips along the Volga, in some places just 500 meters deep. One good German push could reach the river and split the defenders. October 4th. Paulus launches what he calls the final assault. German tanks lead the attack, grinding over rubble, firing point-blank into buildings. Infantry follows behind. Flamethrower teams burn out Soviet positions. Progress is measured in corpses. The Soviets hold. Barely. Chuikov's headquarters is nearly overrun. German troops get within 100 meters of his bunker before being driven back. The 62nd Army is bleeding to death. But it doesn't break. November approaches. The Germans have been fighting in Stalingrad for over 2 months. They control 80% of the city. Victory seems inevitable, just a matter of time. What the Germans don't know is that time has run out. Because while they've been fixated on Stalingrad, while every German resource has poured into capturing this one city, the Soviets have been preparing something else. Something enormous. Something that will change everything. Marshal Georgy Zhukov stands over maps in Moscow. It's October, and he's planning the counter-offensive that will decide the war. The plan is called Operation Uranus. Not an attack on Stalingrad itself, that would be suicide. The Germans are too strong there, too concentrated, too dug in. Instead, attack the flanks. North of Stalingrad, the German 6th Army's flank is held by the Romanian 3rd Army. South of the city, the Romanian 4th Army. These Romanian forces are poorly equipped. Their anti-tank guns are obsolete, useless against Soviet T-34 tanks. Their morale is low. They don't want to be here. Zhukov's plan, twin pincer attacks. Smash through the Romanian armies north and south of Stalingrad. The pincers meet west of the city. Encircle the entire German 6th Army. It's the same tactic the Germans used at Minsk, at Smolensk, at Kiev. Now the Soviets will use it against them. For 2 months, the Soviets assemble forces in total secrecy. Over 1 million men, 13,500 artillery pieces, 900 tanks, 1,100 aircraft. They move at night. Trains arrive in darkness, unload, and leave before dawn. Tanks are camouflaged under haystacks and in forests. Radio silence is absolute. German reconnaissance flights see nothing. German intelligence fails completely. They have no idea a massive Soviet force is assembling. Their attention is fixed on Stalingrad, on the grinding house-to-house combat, on the few hundred meters of city they haven't yet captured. November 19th, 1942. 7:30 a.m. The Northern Front explodes. 3,500 Soviet guns open fire on Romanian 3rd Army positions. 80 minutes of continuous bombardment. The earth shakes. The sky turns orange with muzzle flashes. Romanian trenches collapse. Command posts disintegrate. Then the tanks come. T-34 seconds and KV-1 heavy tanks smash through Romanian lines. Romanian anti-tank guns fire and watch their shells bounce off Soviet armor. The tanks keep coming. Behind the tanks, Soviet infantry. Thousands of them. Advancing in waves. Romanian 3rd Army disintegrates. Some units fight bravely but are overwhelmed. Others flee. Entire divisions surrender en masse. By day's end, the Soviet penetration is 50 kilometers deep. German reserves rush north to plug the gap. But they're too few, too late. The breakthrough is too wide. The Soviet tanks are already racing south towards Stalingrad's rear. November 20th. The southern attack begins. Same pattern. Massive artillery barrage. Tank assault. Romanian Fourth Army collapses. Soviet forces drive north toward the link-up point. German commanders in Stalingrad start receiving panicked reports. Our flanks are collapsing. Soviet tanks are behind us. We're being surrounded. Paulus, commanding Sixth Army, requests permission to break out of Stalingrad while there's still time. Pull back west. Escape the encirclement. Save the army. The request goes to Hitler. November 21st. Hitler is at his Berghof retreat in Bavaria. He receives the news that Soviet pincers are closing around Sixth Army. His immediate reaction: Paulus must hold Stalingrad at all costs. The army will form a hedgehog defense and await relief. His staff officers try to explain. My Führer, Sixth Army is about to be surrounded. If they don't break out now, they'll be trapped. We could lose the entire army. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, interrupts. My Führer, the Luftwaffe can supply Sixth Army by air. We did it at Demyansk earlier this year. We can do it at Stalingrad. This is a lie. Or at best, catastrophic overconfidence. At Demyansk, the Luftwaffe supplied 100,000 troops for 10 weeks in spring weather. Stalingrad would require supplying over 250,000 men through Russian winter. The distances are greater. The weather worse. Soviet air defenses stronger. But Göring wants to restore his prestige after Luftwaffe failures at Britain and Moscow. He promises Hitler the impossible. Hitler believes him, or wants to believe him, or can't face the alternative. November 22nd. Hitler's order reaches Paulus. Sixth Army will hold Stalingrad. Form a circular defense. The Luftwaffe will supply you by air. Relief is being organized. That same day, November 22nd, Soviet pincers meet at Kalach, a town on the Don River, 50 kilometers west of Stalingrad. The trap closes. 250,000 German soldiers are surrounded, plus portions of Romanian and Croatian units. The entire Sixth Army, one of Germany's finest, trapped in a pocket roughly 50 kilometers across. They have limited supplies. Ammunition for maybe 2 weeks of heavy fighting. Food for 3 weeks, if rationed. Fuel for the vehicles is already running low. Paulus could still break out. On November 22nd, the Soviet encirclement is fresh, not yet solidified. A breakout attempt might succeed. Most of Sixth Army could escape. But Hitler's order is clear. Hold Stalingrad. Don't retreat. Paulus is a by-the-book officer. He follows orders. He doesn't break out. The airlift begins. Sixth Army needs 700 tons of supplies per day to survive. Food, ammunition, fuel, medical supplies. 700 tons. Every day. November 24th. The Luftwaffe delivers 30 tons. November 25th. 60 tons. The weather is terrible. Snowstorms. Fog. Temperatures dropping below -20 Celsius. Transport planes can't fly in these conditions. When they do fly, Soviet fighters are waiting. The Red Air Force has air superiority now. German transports, slow, lumbering Ju-52 seconds, are easy targets. Shot down in dozens. The best day of the airlift, December 19th. 289 tons delivered. Still not enough. Not even half of what's needed. The average over the entire siege, 94 tons per day. Less than 15% of requirements. Inside the pocket, 6th Army begins to starve. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein arrives to save 6th Army. He's Germany's best operational commander. The man who planned the invasion of France. Who conquered Sevastopol? If anyone can rescue Paulus, it's Manstein. But he's given inadequate forces. 4th Panzer Army, cobbled together from units scraped from other sectors. 230 tanks total. He needs at least 500 for this mission. Probably more. December 12th, 1942. Operation Winter Storm begins. Manstein's panzers attack northeast from south of Stalingrad. Driving toward the pocket to break through the Soviet encirclement. If they can punch a corridor through to 6th Army, Paulus's forces can break out and escape. The first 2 days go well. German armour smashes through Soviet defensive positions. Advanced 20 miles in 48 hours. The tactics that worked in 1941 still work when applied correctly. December 15th. 40 miles from the pocket. Halfway there. Inside the pocket, 6th Army can hear the distant sound of Manstein's guns. Their radios pick up transmissions from the relief force. Hope surges through the trapped army. Rescue is coming. But then Soviet resistance stiffens. Fresh Soviet armies arrive from reserve. The 2nd Guards Army, elite troops. They dig in across Manstein's path. The advance slows. December 19th. Winter storm reaches the Mishkova River. Just 48 kilometers from Stalingrad's pocket. This is the high water mark. Close enough that on clear days, German soldiers in the relief force can see the glow of fires from Stalingrad on the horizon. Manstein radios Paulus. Prepare Operation Thunderclap. Break out toward my position. We'll link up and escape together. Paulus faces an impossible choice. Breaking out means abandoning Stalingrad. Abandoning the positions Hitler ordered him to hold at all costs. Disobeying direct orders. He's a professional officer. Trained to follow orders. Disobedience doesn't come naturally. And tactically, a breakout is risky. 6th Army is weak from starvation. Low on fuel. They'd have to fight their way through Soviet encirclement forces while moving all their wounded, all their equipment. Many wouldn't make it. Paulus radios Hitler's headquarters. Request permission to execute Thunderclap. Break out toward Manstein's relief force. Hitler's response: 6th Army will remain in position. Hold Stalingrad. Manstein will reach you. December 23rd. Marshal Zhukov launches a devastating counterattack against Manstein's relief force. Soviet armies hit 4th Panzer Army's flanks. T-34 seconds attack in waves. The Germans are outnumbered 3-1. They fight desperately, but they're being ground down. Worse, Zhukov launches a second offensive further west, attacking the Italian 8th Army northwest of Stalingrad. The Italians, even more poorly equipped than the Romanians, collapse immediately. This creates a crisis. If the Soviets break through the Italian sector, they'll encircle Manstein's relief force. Germany will lose 2 armies instead of 1. Manstein faces reality. He can't reach Stalingrad. He can't hold his current position. If he stays, he'll be encircled too. December 26th. Manstein orders 4th Panzer Army to retreat. Operation Winter Storm has failed. The relief force falls back, fighting Soviet pursuit forces every step. They save themselves, but abandon 6th Army to its fate. Manstein sends a final message to Paulus. Not through official channels, Hitler monitors those. Through trusted staff officers. Break out on your own authority. I will take full responsibility with the Führer. But do it now, while there's still time. Paulus considers it. For hours, he agonizes over the decision. Break out and save most of his army, but disobey Hitler and probably be court-martialed. Or stay and follow orders, but doom his men. He chooses to stay. Maybe he believes Hitler will send another relief force. Maybe he can't bring himself to disobey. Maybe it's already too late. His army is too weak, too starved to march 50 kilometers through Soviet lines. Whatever his reasoning, the decision is made. 6th Army will not break out. By early January 1943, the pocket is sealed tight. No relief force is coming. The airlift is failing catastrophically. 250,000 men are trapped. And they're beginning to die. January 1943. Inside the Stalingrad pocket, hell freezes over. The airlift has collapsed. 6th Army needs 700 tons of supplies per day. They're receiving an average of 60 tons. Less than 10% of what's needed. December was bad. January is catastrophic. Soviet fighters hunt German transport planes relentlessly. Ju-52 seconds shot down daily. He-111 bombers pressed into transport service, shot down. Even the giant Me, 323 six-engine transports, each one can carry 10 tons, they're shot down too. The Luftwaffe is losing planes faster than they can be replaced. Experienced crews dying. And the supplies getting through are a fraction of what's needed. The airfields inside the pocket are under constant Soviet artillery fire. Planes that land successfully are often destroyed on the ground. Others crash, trying to land on runways cratered by shells. By mid-January, only one airfield remains usable. Gumrak, and it's barely operational. The rations are cut. December, 300 grams of bread per day per soldier. Barely survival level. January, 100 grams of bread per day. 4 slices. Total daily food. and it's not real bread. It's sawdust, mixed with a little flour, sometimes ground up straw, anything that can be baked into something resembling bread. The horses are slaughtered for food. All of them. Tens of thousands of horses that pulled supply wagons, artillery pieces, butchered and eaten. Then the horses are gone. Soldiers eat anything they can find. Leather belts boiled for hours until they're soft enough to chew. Boot leather. Harness straps. Glue melted from equipment. They're starving to death. Men collapse while walking. Just fall down and don't get up. Their bodies can't function anymore. Heart failure from malnutrition. Or they fall asleep and never wake up. The cold makes it worse. Minus 30 degrees Celsius. Minus 35. The starving body can't generate heat. Frostbite epidemic continues. Field hospitals are overwhelmed. 20,000 wounded and sick. No morphine for pain. No anesthesia for surgery. No antibiotics for infections. Almost no bandages. Surgeons amputate frozen limbs with handsaws. Buy flashlight because there's no electricity. The screams echo through the frozen cellars that serve as hospitals. Most of the wounded don't survive. They die of infections, of shock, of exposure. The dead are stacked outside like cordwood because the ground is too frozen to dig graves. January 8th, 1943. The Soviets offer surrender terms. A delegation approaches German lines under a white flag. They deliver an ultimatum to Paulus. Your situation is hopeless. You are surrounded. No relief is coming. Surrender now, and we guarantee soldiers and officers will keep their personal belongings. The wounded will receive medical care. Normal rations for all prisoners. Repatriation to Germany after the war. Paulus radios Hitler for permission to accept. Hitler's response is predictable. Surrender is forbidden. 6th Army will fight to the last man and the last bullet. The surrender offer is rejected. January 10th. The final Soviet assault begins. Operation Ring. 7 Soviet armies, over 300,000 men, attack the pocket from all directions. Artillery bombardment like nothing the Germans have experienced. 5,000 guns firing simultaneously. The ground shakes. German positions pulverized. Then the tanks and infantry advance. German resistance crumbles. Starving soldiers don't have the strength to fight effectively. Units with no ammunition can only surrender. The perimeter collapses inward day by day. January 16th. Gumrak airfield falls to Soviet forces. The last airfield. No more supply flights possible. No more evacuation of wounded. The pocket splits in two. A northern pocket centered on the tractor factory. A southern pocket where Paulus has his headquarters. The northern pocket fights until February 2nd, before surrendering. The southern pocket collapses first. January 30th, 1943. Hitler makes one final gesture. He promotes Paulus to field marshal by radio. The youngest field marshal in the German army. The message is clear. No German field marshal has ever surrendered. Hitler expects Paulus to commit suicide rather than be captured. January 31st. Soviet troops storm the department store building in downtown Stalingrad where Paulus has his headquarters. They find him in the basement with his staff. Gaunt, exhausted, but alive. A Soviet officer, "You are General Paulus." Field Marshal Paulus. "I surrender myself and my staff." The southern pocket surrenders. 91,000 German soldiers stumble into captivity. They look like walking skeletons. Uniforms hanging off shrunken frames. Eyes sunken. Barely able to walk. Soviet guards are shocked by their condition. These are the conquerors who reach the Volga. These scarecrows who can barely stand. The march into captivity is another death sentence. Long columns trudging east through snow. Men collapse and are left behind. Some are shot by guards. Most just freeze where they fall. The POW camps are unprepared for such numbers. Thousands of prisoners, and the Soviets barely have enough food for their own troops. Disease spreads. Dysentery, typhus, tuberculosis. Most die in the first months of captivity. Of the 91,000 who surrendered in January-February 1943, only 5,000 will ever return to Germany. The rest die in Soviet camps over the next decade. The total cost of Stalingrad: 300,000 German and Axis soldiers dead or captured. 300,000 Soviet soldiers and civilians dead. It's Germany's greatest catastrophe in the war so far. But it won't be the last. While 6th Army dies at Stalingrad, another German catastrophe is unfolding 400 miles to the south. Army Group A, over 1 million men, is deep in the Caucasus Mountains. They drove there in summer and autumn 1942, racing toward the oil fields that Hitler desperately needed. Now, they're trapped. The destruction of 6th Army at Stalingrad has ripped open the entire German southern flank. Soviet forces are pouring west of Stalingrad, driving toward Rostov. That's the gateway to the Caucasus, the only road out. If the Soviets reach Rostov before Army Group A can retreat through it, another 1 million German soldiers will be surrounded. Germany will lose 2 entire army groups in one winter. The war will be over. Early January 1943. Hitler finally, reluctantly authorizes Army Group A to retreat. But he delays the order for days. Keeps reconsidering. Keeps hoping some miracle will allow them to stay and capture the oil fields. No miracle comes. Just the reality of Soviet armies advancing toward Rostov. The retreat becomes a race against time. Army Group A, now commanded by Field Marshal Ewald von Kleist after List was fired in September, begins pulling back from the Caucasus, abandoning the positions they fought all summer to reach, abandoning the oil fields they never captured. It's winter in the mountains. -20 degrees Celsius. Mountain passes choked with snow. Narrow roads where vehicles break down and can't be moved, blocking entire columns. Soviet pursuit forces harass them constantly. Partisan units attack supply convoys. The Red Air Force bombs retreat routes. German rearguard units fight desperate delaying actions to buy time for the main force to escape. Field Marshal Manstein, the same commander who tried to relieve Stalingrad, now coordinates the overall southern retreat. He's a master of mobile defense. Knows how to trade space for time. How to use counterattacks to slow Soviet advances. The German army is retreating, but it's not collapsing. Units maintain cohesion. Officers keep control. This is a professional military executing a difficult withdrawal under terrible conditions. But they're abandoning everything. Equipment that can't be moved is destroyed. Ammunition dumps blown up. Supply depots burned. Artillery pieces that break down are spiked and left behind. Late January. The first units of Army Group A reach Rostov. The city is still in German hands, barely. Soviet forces are closing in from the north and east. The withdrawal becomes desperate. Trains loaded with troops and equipment pull out of Rostov station under Soviet artillery fire. The last trains leave with shells landing on the tracks behind them. February. Army Group A completes its escape. They've lost enormous amounts of equipment. They've taken heavy casualties. But the army survives. It's a near miracle. If Hitler had delayed the retreat order another week, if Manstein hadn't coordinated the withdrawal brilliantly, if Soviet forces had moved faster, Army Group A would have been annihilated. But surviving isn't winning. Germany has retreated from the Caucasus without capturing a single productive oil field. The entire strategic objective of Operation Blue, the reason for the summer offensive, has failed completely. And the Soviets aren't stopping. January 12, 1943. While Army Group A retreats, Marshal Zhukov launches Operation Saturn, a massive offensive across a 500-mile front. Multiple Soviet army groups attacking simultaneously. The goal: destroy all German forces in southern Russia. The Red Army has overwhelming superiority. 7-1 numerical advantage in some sectors. Fresh divisions equipped with new tanks. Artillery in numbers the Germans can't match. Germany's allies collapse first. The Hungarian Second Army, holding a sector northwest of Stalingrad, is annihilated. Ceases to exist as a fighting force. Survivors flee west in disorder. The Italian Eighth Army, already mauled in December, is destroyed completely. Italian divisions surrender en masse. Others disintegrate. Italy loses 200,000 men. German Second Army barely escapes encirclement. Fights a series of desperate rearguard actions. Loses half its strength, but avoids being trapped. The entire southern front is collapsing. February 8th. Soviet forces recapture Kursk, a major rail junction in western Russia. February 16th. Kharkov falls. Ukraine's second city, the industrial centre the Germans captured in October 1941, now liberated. The Soviet advance is stunning. 400 miles from Stalingrad. Recapturing territory lost over 18 months. Entire regions of Ukraine and southern Russia liberated in weeks. Stalin believes Germany might collapse entirely. That the war could be won by summer. He orders his commanders, drive to the Dnieper River. Liberate all of Ukraine. Don't stop. But the Red Army is overextended. Supply lines are stretched hundreds of miles. Units are exhausted from continuous fighting. The spring Rasputitsa is approaching, the mud that will halt all movement. And Manstein is preparing a counterstroke. Late February. Manstein concentrates his remaining panzer divisions in southern Ukraine. He's been trading space for time, pulling back and pulling back. Now the Soviets are overconfident, spread thin, vulnerable. Manstein strikes. German panzers slash into overextended Soviet columns. The Third Battle of Kharkov begins. For 3 weeks, mobile warfare swirls across the Ukrainian steppes. March 15th. Manstein recaptures Kharkov. The city changes hands for the 4th time in the war. The Soviet advance finally halts. Not because they're defeated, but because spring mud arrives and nobody can move. By late March, the front stabilizes. The winter campaign is over. The results are catastrophic for Germany. December 1942 through March 1943. 4 months of fighting. Germany has lost over 1 million men. Dead, wounded, captured. 3,000 tanks destroyed. 10,000 artillery pieces lost. Supplies and equipment on a scale that can't be replaced. The strategic balance has shifted permanently. The Red Army now clearly has the initiative. Soviet industrial production has ramped up, tanks and guns pouring off assembly lines in the Urals. American and British aid flowing through Arctic convoys and the Persian corridor. Germany's advantages are eroding. The T-34 tank is now equal to or better than German armour. Soviet commanders have learned from their mistakes. The Red Air Force is gaining parity with the Luftwaffe. And Germany's most important advantage, experienced professional soldiers, has been bled white. The veterans of Poland, France, the Balkans, the early months of Barbarossa, dead at Moscow, at Stalingrad, in the retreat from the Caucasus. Replacements are younger, less trained, less capable. The quality of the Wehrmacht is declining while the Red Army improves. But Hitler refuses to accept reality, refuses to consider that Germany might lose. Instead, he plans one more offensive, one more chance to seize the initiative. His eyes turn to a bulge in the Soviet lines around Kursk. Spring 1943. The winter fighting has created a salient in the front lines. The Kursk salient. A bulge where Soviet forces pushed west during their winter offensive. It protrudes 100 miles into German-held territory. To Hitler, it looks like an opportunity. Attack from the north and south simultaneously. Cut off the salient. Trap the Soviet forces inside. Destroy them. Another great encirclement, like the victories of 1941. It could restore German prestige after Stalingrad. Show the world Germany can still win offensive battles. Shatter Soviet morale. Buy time to build new defences. The operation is called Citadel, Unternehmen Citadel. But Hitler delays. And delays. And delays. He wants to wait for new wonder weapons. The Tiger tank, 55 tons, armed with an 88mm gun, virtually impervious to Soviet anti-tank weapons from the front. The Panther tank, 43 tons, 75mm high-velocity gun, designed specifically to counter the T-34. The Ferdinand tank destroyer, 65 tons, 88mm gun, the thickest armor of any vehicle. These are technological marvels, superior to anything the Soviets have. But they're brand new. Production is slow. Hitler wants enough of them before attacking. So, Citadel is postponed from April to May, from May to June, finally scheduled for early July. Every week of delay is a gift to the Soviets. Because Marshal Zhukov knows the attack is coming. Soviet intelligence is superb now. They have spies inside German high command. They intercept communications. They analyze German movements. Zhukov receives detailed information about Citadel, when it will start, where the attacks will come from, which units will participate. He makes a radical decision. Let them come. Don't attack first. Don't try to disrupt their preparations. Instead, build the most comprehensive defensive system in history. Let the Germans smash themselves against Soviet defenses. Then counterattack when they're exhausted. The Kursk salient becomes a fortress. 8 successive defensive lines. Some zones over 20 miles deep. 400,000 mines laid. 2,500 anti-tank mines per mile of front. Anti-tank ditches 15 feet deep and 12 feet wide. Dragon's teeth, concrete obstacles. Barbed wire belts hundreds of yards deep. 20,000 artillery pieces and rocket launchers. Positioned to create interlocking fields of fire, pre-registered on likely German approach routes. And reserves. Massive reserves positioned behind the defensive lines. Fresh armies ready to counterattack any breakthrough. 6 months to prepare. The Soviets know exactly when and where the Germans are coming. They're ready. July 5th, 1943. 1 a.m. Soviet artillery opens fire. A pre-emptive strike hitting German assembly areas just hours before the planned attack. They know the German schedule down to the hour. But the Germans proceed anyway. Dawn. Operation Citadel begins. From the north, Field Marshal Walther Model's 9th Army. From the south, General Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army. Together, nearly 3,000 tanks and assault guns, the largest concentration of German armour ever assembled. The northern attack is a disaster from the start. 9th Army runs into the Soviet defensive system and just stops. Mines blow up tanks. Anti-tank guns, hidden in fortified positions, knock out Tigers and Panthers. Artillery pounds German formations. Soviet defenders let German tanks advance into kill zones, then fire from 3 sides. The new German tanks are superior in one-on-one combat, but they're outnumbered and trapped in prepared defensive positions. 6 days of brutal fighting. 9th Army gains exactly 6 miles. Loses 25,000 men and 200 tanks. The offensive in the north is dead. The southern attack does better. Hoth's 4th Panzer Army has more tanks, better commanders, achieves better initial penetration. They break through the first Soviet defensive line, then the second. By July 10th, they've advanced 25 miles into the salient. For a brief moment, a German breakthrough seems possible. July 12, 1943. The village of Prokhorovka. Zhukov unleashes his strategic reserve. The 5th Guards Tank Army, 850 tanks. He orders them to charge straight into the German advance. The Soviet tank commander, Pavel Rotmistrov, issues orders, close with the enemy. Get so close the Germans can't use their superior guns and armour effectively. Rams them if you have to. What follows is the largest tank battle in history. Nearly 2,000 tanks fighting across 15 square miles. T-34 seconds, charging at German Tigers and Panthers, ramming them, firing at point-blank range. The battlefield becomes chaos. Smoke from burning tanks obscures everything. Dust clouds kicked up by tracks. Explosions everywhere. Commanders lose control of their units. Tanks firing at 50 meters. Crews abandoning burning vehicles and fighting on foot. Infantry attacking tanks with magnetic mines and Molotov cocktails. The battle rages all day into evening. By nightfall, the battlefield is littered with burning wrecks. The Soviets lose 300 to 400 tanks. The Germans lose 200 tanks and assault guns. Both sides claim victory. Both sides are savaged. But there's a crucial difference. The Soviets can replace their losses. Germany cannot. July 13th. Hitler calls off Operation Citadel. His excuse: Allied forces invaded Sicily on July 10th. He needs to send troops to Italy. The truth: Citadel has failed. The northern attack gained nothing. The southern attack is stalled at Prokhorovka. German losses are unsustainable. The Wehrmacht begins withdrawing. July 15th. Before the Germans can even complete their retreat, the Soviets launch massive counter-offensives. Operation Kutuzov strikes the northern shoulder of the salient. Operation Polkovodets, Rumiantsev hits the south. Fresh Soviet armies, held in reserve during Citadel, now attack exhausted German forces. The German army reels backward. August 5th, 1943. Soviet forces recapture Kursk. Then keep advancing. The Battle of Kursk costs Germany over 50,000 casualties and 700 tanks. Soviet casualties are higher, but they can afford them and Germany can't. More importantly, Kursk marks the end of German offensive capability on the Eastern Front. From June 1941 through July 1943, 2 years, Germany launched massive summer offensives. Operation Barbarossa, Operation Blue, Operation Citadel. After Kursk, there will be no more. From this point forward, the Red Army attacks and the Wehrmacht defends. Every few months, another Soviet offensive drives the Germans further west. August 1943, Kharkov liberated permanently. September, Soviet forces cross the Dnieper River. Then, in November, Kiev liberated. 1944. The Soviets liberate Ukraine, then Belarus, then the Baltic states. By year's end, they're in Poland. January 1945. The Red Army enters Germany itself. April. They storm Berlin. The Blitzkrieg is dead. The tide has turned permanently. The steamroller has begun. And it won't stop until Soviet tanks are parked in front of the Reichstag. The soldiers who crossed the Bug River on June 22, 1941, were right to be afraid. They were walking into hell. Not immediately. Not in the first weeks, when everything seemed to be going perfectly, when Soviet armies surrendered in hundreds of thousands, when the panzers raced hundreds of miles without serious resistance, when Moscow appeared within reach. Hell came slowly. It came in the 5 weeks wasted, conquering the Balkans in spring, the weeks that meant the difference between reaching Moscow in September and freezing 19 miles short in December. It came in Hitler's decision to turn south toward Kiev, instead of driving straight for the Soviet capital. 6 weeks spent achieving a magnificent tactical victory that lost the strategic war. It came in the mud of October that drowned the German advance. In the winter of November and December, that froze an army unprepared for cold. In the Siberian divisions that Stalin unleashed when he learned Japan wouldn't attack. It came in Hitler's obsession with a city that bore his enemy's name. Stalingrad, which wasn't even part of the original plan for Operation Blue, which mattered more for symbolism than strategy, which became a grave for 250,000 men because 2 dictators' egos couldn't let it go. It came in the oil fields Hitler never captured. Maikop destroyed. Grozny out of reach. Baku never threatened. The resources that were supposed to fuel victory remained in Soviet hands while German tanks ran dry. It came in the arrogance that assumed one good kick would bring down the whole rotten structure. The arrogance that dismissed Soviet industrial capacity, Soviet reserves of manpower, Soviet ability to learn and adapt. Hell swallowed the Third Reich whole. Not in a day, not in a dramatic moment, but over 4 years of grinding destruction. 4 million German soldiers died on the Eastern Front. Out of 5 million total German military deaths in the war, 4 million died fighting the Soviet Union. This is where the Wehrmacht was destroyed. Not in France. Not in North Africa. Here. 27 million Soviet citizens died. Military and civilian. The scale is almost incomprehensible. Entire villages wiped out. Whole generations gone. The war in the West, D-Day, the liberation of France, the drive into Germany, those mattered. Without them, the war might have lasted years longer. But the Eastern Front was the war. Everything else was supporting action. 80% of German military casualties occurred fighting the Soviet Union. The vast majority of German tanks destroyed, aircraft shot down, divisions annihilated, all on the Eastern Front. Without the Soviet Union bleeding Germany white, D-Day would have been impossible. The Atlantic Wall would have been manned by veterans instead of second-rate divisions. The panzers defending France would have numbered in thousands instead of hundreds. History remembers Normandy. Russians remember Stalingrad. Both mattered. One mattered more. Operation Barbarossa didn't doom the Third Reich in a single day. It doomed it the moment Hitler signed the order. The execution was a slow-motion catastrophe. Brilliant tactical victories that guaranteed strategic defeat. Every mile deeper into Russia was another mile to retreat. Every Soviet soldier killed meant 2 more conscripted. Every German veteran lost was irreplaceable. The arc from the Bug River to Berlin was inevitable from the start. Not because the Soviet Union was stronger. In June 1941, Germany had every advantage except numbers. Better tanks, better tactics, better commanders, better trained troops. But numbers matter. Industrial capacity matters. And in a war of attrition, which this became the moment Moscow didn't fall in 41, Germany couldn't win. Hitler gambled everything on a quick victory. Counted on the Soviet Union collapsing before winter, before the vast Soviet resources could be mobilized, before the endless Soviet manpower could be trained and equipped. He lost the gamble. And once he lost it, there was no way back. No miracle weapon that could reverse the tide. No strategy that could win against an enemy with more men, more tanks, more guns, and, increasingly, commanders who learned from their mistakes. From Kursk in July 1943, it's all retreat. The Red Army launches offensive after offensive. Each one drives the Germans further west. The Wehrmacht fights brilliantly in defense. Manstein's mobile battles, the stand at Narva, countless desperate last stands. But they're always retreating. Always falling back. Always losing more men they can't replace. 1944. Ukraine liberated. Belarus liberated. The Balkans liberated. Romania switches sides. Bulgaria surrenders. Finland exits the war. January 1945. The Red Army crosses into Germany. The war that started on Soviet soil in June 41 now comes home to the Reich. April 1945. Soviet forces storm Berlin. Street fighting in the capital. The Reichstag surrounded. April 30th. Adolf Hitler commits suicide in his bunker as Soviet shells rain down above. May 2nd. Berlin falls. The Soviet flag is raised over the Reichstag. May 8th. Germany surrenders unconditionally. Operation Barbarossa, June 22nd, 1941. Fall of Berlin, May 2nd, 1945. 3 years, 10 months, 10 days. The invasion that doomed the Third Reich took 4 years to complete the doom. But from the first day, the outcome was written. Hitler just refused to read it until Soviet soldiers were raising their flag over his capital. Klaus, the 23-year-old soldier we met at the Bug River in June 41, he was right. He was walking into hell. And hell swallowed him, and 4 million others like him, and the 1,000-year Reich that was supposed to last forever. The soldiers who crossed that river had no idea. No idea that 19 miles from Moscow would be as close as they'd ever get. No idea that a city called Stalingrad would become their graveyard. No idea that every victory in summer 41 was just making the eventual defeat more catastrophic. But the signs were there from the beginning. In the T-34 tanks that shocked German crews. In the Soviet soldiers who fought to the last bullet when surrounded. In the vast distances that swallowed German advances. In the calendar counting down to winter. Hitler ignored all of them. Believed his own propaganda. Thought willpower could overcome mathematics. That racial superiority mattered more than industrial capacity. That one great man could defeat a nation of 200 million. He was wrong. And that's the real lesson of Operation Barbarossa. Not the tactics, not the battles, but the simple truth that wars are won by resources, by production, by the ability to absorb losses and keep fighting. Germany had the better army in June 41. The Soviet Union had the bigger one, and in the end, bigger won. June 22nd, 1941, 3:15 a.m. 4 million men crossed a river and walked into hell. They didn't know it yet, but hell was waiting, and it would swallow them all.